Welcome to Project Planning 101. In this video, we're going to go over 3 crucial skills all new attorneys need for when they hit the job in their first summer. Today, we're going to discuss receiving an assignment, executing your project, and communicating those results. Often, lawyers receive an assignment on the run. That is, you're walking down the hallway and your boss says, "Hey, you, I need you to work on something." So what are the 2 things that you should always bring with you to a meeting with your supervisor? Pens and paper. I know, it may seem really old-fashioned, but when receiving an assignment from your boss, that's what they're going to expect you to bring in. Not your iPad, not your phone, and not a computer. They're going to expect you to just be able to grab some paper, a pen, and hit the ground running to take notes. This is why I've asked you in class to not use your laptops when you can try to avoid it. You have to learn how to take good notes, notes that allow you to remember the key aspects of any particular meeting, while also enabling you to communicate with the person who's giving you that assignment. All right, so you're walking down the hallway, boss says, "Hey, I have an assignment for you." You find your nearest friend, give you a pad of paper and pen, and you head in. "I'm ready to go." So listen carefully and take notes. You want to keep a checklist with you of must-have information. Eventually, this checklist is going to become second nature to you. You'll have it memorized. But until that comes, you might want to just keep a little paper that has that checklist of ideas handy at all times. You're going to ask questions to fill out your checklist, to fill in the blanks on any of the things that the boss doesn't tell you as they're giving you the big assignment. You want to be conservative with those clarification questions, though. Many of the pieces of information that you want, or the questions you're going to want to ask, you could probably find the answers to those on your own without taking up your boss's time to answer them. So be conservative with those clarification questions and stick with your checklist. So what goes on the checklist? What is the assignment? Okay, so what do we mean by what is the assignment? It means, is the boss looking for a memo? Is the boss looking for a quick email or a stack of cases or sources with a sticky note? Are they looking for an oral report? You want to make sure that you know what the nature of the assignment actually is. Next, ask what's going to be done with your work. Is it going to be, if it's a memo, is it going to be given to the client? Is it going to be used to draft some other sort of document or pleading in the course of litigation? Super duper important. Make sure you know when that assignment is due and make sure you know about any other interim deadlines. Your boss may want you to check in ahead of time and give an oral report on something before giving a final memo. Ask what kind of approximate length is expected. Again, this goes back a little bit towards the what is the assignment question. If the boss is not expecting a big, long, formal memo, they're going to be very disappointed and frustrated if you hand them that big, formal memo. Maybe they were just hoping for that quick email. It's also appropriate to ask what the expected number of hours are for the project, right? So in any sort of private practice, all of your time gets billed back towards the client. And the client may have limited resources and limited patience for spending money on associates or law clerks trying to come up to speed on a matter. So ask what the expected number of hours are to be devoted to this project. If it's something really quick, then you know not to spend days on it. Ask what form for that work product. Ask them if they want you to put together that full formal memo. Ask whether they want you to put together a draft of some portion of a contract or agreement. Always make sure you're clear on what the form of that work product should look at. Once you know what work product is expected, do ask if there are any effective samples that you should look at. Sure, we're teaching you different ways of crafting formal memos or email memos, but as I've said over and over again, that is just kind of like the skeleton, the basic bones of what your employer might eventually expect. Every employer has their own sort of format that they expect and that they think is the one right way to do the memo. So always make sure that you ask for an effective sample to look at, whether it's a memo, a pleading, a motion, a contract provision. Those effective samples can help you conform your knowledge to the format that your boss is expecting. You can also feel free to ask if there's anybody you should consult. Is there somebody else within the firm or organization who's recently worked on a similar matter? Is there somebody who's an expert on a particular matter in your office? It's always acceptable to ask if there's anyone you should consult. And again, that consultation can come back to actually benefit the client because then you're not spending as much time trying to come up to speed or trying to find some initial resources. If you go to a person who is already an expert in the field, it can start you out on the right foot. One of the most important questions you can ask is there a file that you can look at? When that boss starts to give you the assignment, they're probably going to give you lots of facts about the client case. They're going to give you some background, but they're not going to give you everything, and not everything is necessarily completely accurate. Remember, I said you're going to have this instinct to want to ask lots of clarifying questions, and the questions you're going to tend to want to ask are all the ones about the underlying client facts. So instead of asking those clarifying questions, I think it's much better to ask if there's a file you could look at or some original documents you could look at, interview notes that you could look at, so that you can get the questions you have, the clarifying questions about the facts you have, answered more from a straight source and by not taking up so much of your boss's time. So think, before I ask this clarifying factual question, have I asked if there's a file I can take a look at? Also ask about the case information. You're going to want to know where you are within the litigation. If it is a litigation case, you're going to want to know what the client is actually looking for, what the end result the client is hoping for. Make sure that you have that. You're also going to want case name and docket number. You can always ask your boss if they have any suggestions on what you should consult. They may have an idea that there is a case in the Seventh Circuit or a case in Illinois that has already answered the question or has addressed this issue that you've been asked to research. So you can always ask if the boss has any suggestions for where you should start your research. You should also ask about any limitations on the research that you should do. Now, this is becoming less of an issue as time goes on and more folks are becoming more dependent upon computer-assisted legal research, and as the cost of doing said research has come down. But you should know whether or not a client is going to pay for Westlaw, Lexis, or Bloomberg Access, because all of those charges that you rack up in researching a client matter do get charged back to the client. So you want to know whether you have to do book research, electronic research, or a combination. And better safe than sorry, ask ahead. Finally, make sure you ask your supervisor how he or she wants you to follow up with them. Maybe they want an oral report. Maybe they would like to check in and see what your progress is on an assignment. Ask them how they would like you to follow up with them. Would they prefer email? Would they prefer an in-person meeting? Do they want you to set up another appointment? Make sure that you know those things. So great, you now have your assignment and you have to look towards planning out this project. All right, let's assume that your assignment is a formal memo, right? An open universe formal memo where you have to figure out the answer to a question or two. Maybe you're looking to see if the client has a claim or a defense in a particular matter. So when planning any project, remember that you actually should have 4 personalities. And we want to give each of those personalities plenty of time to work. Putting it in the context of LARC, a typical 3-week LARC project should be planned out as follows. In the first week, that's when you should be doing research, when you should be employing your madman and architect. In week 2, that's when you should be the carpenter, meaning you're sitting down and actually crafting out the written product. And that gives you week 3 with the judge. The judge is your reviser and your editor. They're the one that's super critical about everything you've put in, from your organization and your structure to your case choices, on down to the citation and the minutia contained within your product. If you plan out your 3-week Lark project in this way, you shouldn't feel as time crunched, and you should be able to produce a nice, solid piece at the end. When planning and budgeting time, remember that all good projects are going to need those 4 personalities for the best final product. And never, ever blow your deadlines. Almost as bad is cramming your work into the last minute. I think we all can remember some time when we've procrastinated. Perhaps you just procrastinated on the assignment that you turned in this week, and it probably didn't feel so great. I'll let you in on a secret. It's not a secret. The product probably wasn't so great. The product actually probably was not nearly as good as it could have been had you not had to cram the work and had more time to let all of these different personalities work. Okay, so I keep mentioning these 4 personalities, and I've given you names for them, and now you're probably very confused. So let's take a couple steps back and talk about what I mean by the 4 personalities. If you've read through your Red Book or read any other articles by Brian Garner, you may have seen him refer to the 4 personalities. This is a way of thinking about a writing project and thinking about writing that he actually got from an English professor at the University of Texas named Professor Flowers. Professor Flowers contends that there are 4 different personalities that are necessary to produce any good written work. The first personality is called the madman. The madman is responsible for coming up with crazy creative ideas. They're the person who brainstorms. It's the personality that thinks of your search terms, helps you dive through all kinds of different resources, and comes up with the really great ideas. The architect is the personality that comes in and takes what's been brainstormed and starts putting it into some kind of functional outline, starts putting out a schematic so that the issues are in the right order, the components are in the right order. The getting to the architect from the madman can be very difficult because the madman just wants to go all over the place. And that's why I'm a big fan of that nonlinear outlining. I've shown you examples in class of what nonlinear outlining looks like, and I recommend you follow up by looking up things like whirlybirds. Those are in your textbook. You can also find references to nonlinear outlining through Brian Garner. In short, what it allows you to do is to diagram out ideas so that you don't get stuck in one frame of mind or try to get stuck in some sort of a formal piece of writing or a formal hierarchical outline. It allows you to jump from idea to idea to idea to get you out of a rut and to get you making progress towards actually writing something good. The next personality you have is the carpenter. The carpenter is the personality that sits down and actually writes the thing, actually writes up the memo. Now, many of you are probably jumping from that first personality of the madman straight into the carpenter. I've noticed that as a class, we've struggled with outlining. We don't really understand standard hierarchical outlining. And I think that's because over time, we, as a generation, have developed into a group that just likes to compose at the screen without doing that pre-writing step of outlining. I'm going to suggest to you that you at least want to get into some form of graphical organization, non-linear outlining before you try to sit down and write, because it will help you with writer's block. When you have all those great ideas swimming around in your head, it's really hard to get them to conform to the pretty strict structure that we use in law for legal analysis. Using some nonlinear outlining, even if it's not a full formal outline, nonlinear outlining will help you at least organize some of those ideas so that you can move from idea to idea to idea without sitting at the keyboard going, now what am I going to write? So the carpenter with a good architectural drawing is going to be able to bang out that paper in absolutely no time at all. Final personality is the judge. The judge is the person is a personality who comes in and scrutinizes whether or not you've hit all the correct issues, whether you've analyzed all the issues, whether the analysis does follow that standard form of an IRAC, whether your ideas flow from one to the next. In other words, the judge is looking at everything from the overall structure of the paper down to where you put that period, where you put that comma, and whether or not you included all the quotation marks where you should. That judge needs a long time with the paper, so we're going to start to write to a false deadline to allow that judge enough time to work. The judge works best when the judge has had time to forget what the carpenter and the architect told him previously. When things have cooled down a bit, the judge can be the most effective at his job. Let me put it to you this way. Have you taken out your memo from last semester and looked at it? Did you take a look at it and go, why on earth did I write that? Or how did I miss that was a fragment? Or what was I thinking? Pretty much everybody does at this stage. And that's because your brain has had enough time to forget what you wrote in order to catch the mistakes that you didn't catch at the time. Our brains do a lot of auto-correcting. Letting your judge have at least a week with your document allows you to put the paper away for a couple of days to try to deactivate that autocorrect nature that we have. In the upcoming weeks, we're going to be talking a lot more about editing and the multi-step process that you probably should be going through as a judge in that last week. But for now, let's just say if we give ourselves a full week, imagine all the time you would have to come in and talk to me or talk to a TA about your questions and get things resolved. And imagine how much better your paper is going to be when you've had that extra time. Okay, enough preaching. So let's get back to that timeline for your 3-week project. Like I said, week 1 is the time for your madman to run wild. It's your research week. At the end of week 1, you should have a pretty good idea of where the answer is going. You should have a good idea of what resources you're going to use, what's best, and have started to at least develop some notes for follow-up. That week 2, architect and carpenter are going to be outlining and drafting away. Now, these two personalities work best when they have a little time off between sessions. This is the personality. These two are the personalities above all others that really want to take things in smaller chunks. So think about, instead of trying to sit down and pound out an entire draft saying, oh, I'm going to save my Saturday to do my draft. We know that doesn't work, right? We all get distracted by something else. We can find everything a lot more interesting, including reorganizing our sock drawers. We know that's the case. So instead, set smaller goals for yourself. Say, okay, you know what? Tonight, I'm going to write up the analysis for issue 1. Tomorrow night, I'm going to draft my questions presented in short answers. Then I'm going to draft my statement of facts. Breaking it up into these smaller bite-sized pieces will make it a lot easier to finish that project in a timely manner and not get stuck with analysis paralysis or get stuck with being overwhelmed by the size of the project. And then, as I said, we need that full week for your judge to get in there and work on the revising and editing of the project. If you follow this timeline, I assure you, you're going to have more than enough time to produce the best possible work, and you can produce the best possible work because you have plenty of time to figure out what questions you have, and you can come get those questions answered. So let's go back to the real world. While you're working on the project, I want you to remember that you want to keep in communication with your supervisor. It's perfectly okay to ask for clarification of points, asking for clarification of the assignment or the question presented. You're going to want to do this follow-up shortly after receiving the assignment so that your boss knows, your manager knows that, hey, you are working on this, it hasn't gone out into the ether, and that you're not spinning your wheels doing something that he or she does not want you to work on. But before you do follow up with that manager, make sure that you organize your thoughts. You don't want to send the boss a whole bunch of emails with, one question each as they hit your brain. Instead, just keep a pad of paper or a notes section open on your computer where you can write out all the different questions you have. and then go back. As you're writing out new questions, you may answer some of those earlier questions. And think about who else might be able to help you answer those questions. Is there another colleague that can answer some questions about format or location of of different pieces of information? The key is you don't want to bug your boss with questions that suggest you're not working earnestly on your project. Next, I also want you to remember to work smarter and not harder, which means working efficiently and effectively. I need you to do a little bit more planning of each step, especially when it comes to research. One of the things that was very clear from the papers that I read for the direct response email memo, your research plans were highly undeveloped. Everybody was missing the critical step of checking citators, making sure that your law is still good law. A lot of folks, the sources that folks were consulting were Westlaw and Lexis. Well, Westlaw and Lexis and Google aren't actually sources. You should think of them more like libraries. So it's not really about, you wouldn't say, well, I'm going to go to the library. That's my research plan. That's what essentially you're saying. If you're saying, I'm going to go to Westlaw, be more conscious and more deliberate about what you are looking at. Oh, I'm going to be looking for statutes because I think this is a statutory issue. Or I'm going to be looking for cases because I know this is a common law issue. I'm going to be looking, I know this is a federal issue, so I'm going to be concentrating on the Seventh Circuit and the Northern District of Illinois because that's where my client's case is. So I want you to plan each step and I want you to consider those best paths. I don't want you looking for a statute when something's clearly common law, nor do I want you to look for cases when you know some statute has to be the origin of all of that. Okay, so think about the best paths for you to go to. If you're looking for more resources on research paths and how to organize a research plan, please let me know. I have plenty of extra resources that I'm happy to make available to you, including checklists from the Sloan text. I also need you to make sure you're keeping accurate, thorough notes. One of the worst and most frustrating things to do is to have to go back and find that which you already read but didn't take good notes on the source. So some of the really important information to keep in those accurate and thorough notes: names of sources and citation. Citation doesn't have to be in Blue Book form. That's fine, but make sure that you've recorded enough of that citation such that you could easily recall it. It's also a good idea to keep track of what terms led to what sources. This helps prevent going back and using the same terms over and over again that you've already used previously. It helps you not repeat work that you've already completed. Okay, so great. I got my assignment, I planned it out, and I've done a pretty good job. I've done all of my research. And, well, one of the things my boss asked me to do was come in and give an oral report. Well, it's one of the things you're going to have to do in the next assignment. Oftentimes, these can be used as a check-in for your assignment, so the boss knows that you're working on the assignment, that you're making headway, and to clear up any maybe miscommunication or misdirection that you might be headed in. They could also be the final product. Not everybody's going to want a long formal memo. Many bosses are just going to want a quick oral report, a quick stack of cases or resources with a couple sticky notes, or that email memo that you just did. So this could be the final product. The scope of these oral reports can vary, but they always have the same expectations. Your boss is going to expect that you're going to be responsive, meaning that you understand the question that you were asked and that you answer that question. They're also going to want to make sure that you're informative, that you actually teach them the law and how it applies to your client's case. All of this requires exhaustive preparation. It takes a long time to put together a good oral report, and make sure you're putting in that time, effort, and energy to make sure that it comes off without a hitch. So, what kind of oral report preparation are we looking at? First, make sure you understand what is the specific question you're reporting on. Make sure you have that clear as a bell. Remember, I said it's okay to go back and ask for clarification of an assignment. That's one of the things you can clarify. You can go back and say, hey, I think you've been asking me, or you've asked me to look at such and such. It's okay to make that clarification. What happens if you don't know what the assignment is? What if you're still confused about what the assignment is? Well, then you absolutely need to go in and seek some clarification. For some tips and techniques on how to get that sort of clarification, check out the article that I posted from the Business Insider in this week's materials. All right, back to our preparation. I have my specific question. I know what I'm reporting on. Now I need to think about who the audience is. Is it my boss? Or is it a bunch of partners? Or is it our whole litigation team? I want to know who the audience is. Maybe the client is there. Okay. Think about time constraints. Is this going to be a quick 15-minute meeting? Do you have a longer time? Is this a formal presentation that's going to be over an hour long? Remember that lawyers do oral reports to their boss, but they also do oral reports in lots of other situations. You may be delivering a training for young attorneys. You may be delivering a training for lay people on special education law, fostering, and foster care law. You never know. We do lots of presentations as attorneys, and all of these tips and tricks work for whatever presentation we're talking about. So back to who we were thinking about, who's the audience? Maybe you're not even talking to other lawyers. Maybe you're talking to lay people. Maybe you're talking to high schoolers. Anybody who's going on the spring break project to the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, you're going to be talking to high schoolers. So you have a different audience and you would adjust your presentation likewise. Time constraints again. How long do you have for this report? Think about what you already know. Okay, what do you already know and what do you need to know? So don't go back and try to reinvent the wheel about things that you're already sure of. Instead, make sure you're focusing in on what do you need to know and what your audience needs to know. So, what's the structure of this oral report? Assuming that you're doing a report to the supervising attorney about your research results, one of the first assignments you have in this next 3 assignment arc, you're going to think about this oral report kind of as an oral memo. It's going to start off with an introduction with the specific question posed. Oh, you asked us to look at such and such, or you asked us to research whether. Give that quick, specific question that was posed. You might want to orient your listener, your boss, with some background. As you may recall, blah, 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 blah. And then give that brief answer. In short, we think that we have a claim under this, but not under that. Next piece, the discussion. And it's very much like the discussion that you do in that formal written memo. You're going to explain the law. You're going to review the necessary client facts, and then you're going to apply those rules to facts. The biggest difference between the written memo and the oral memo is that in the oral memo, we tend to not do a lot of case illustration. Our case illustrations in an oral memo are much shorter, succinct, may only be a sentence or two, unlike the ones that we read up in the formal memos when we're doing long analogical analysis. The big thing you want to remember is that you have to explain what the law is in working from those broad to narrow concepts, and then you need to tie those concepts directly to the client facts and explain how each element of the law is met or not met by those client facts. You're going to end with a conclusion. It's the probable outcome of the case, and then any recommendations that you have for the client or for the matter. Now, that discussion, remember, it may be multiple issues, and so when you're doing that introduction, you're going to want to set out that, hey, to answer this question, it actually brings up these 3 issues, and here are the answer on each issue. If you're giving a presentation with multiple people, that person who gives the introduction is going to want to flag for the listener, for the boss, who in the group is going to be talking about each of the relevant issues. Okay, so let's talk about some do's and don'ts with oral reports. Do: Adopt a nice, clean speaking tone, not too quick, not too slow, with some clear diction. It's really hard to keep a good pace when you get excited and amped up on the adrenaline of giving an oral report. Try to keep that in check. Don't read. You're going to want to sound really intelligent, so you may have a tendency or an inclination that you should write up everything you're about to say in this oral report like it is your memo, but don't do that, because one of the things you're going to lose in reading is the all-important eye contact. You want to make sure that you're looking at your audience and looking at the boss so that you can invite that dialogue, which makes for a strong oral report. A good oral report will pretty much invite the listener to ask questions and turn a monologue into a dialogue. Those are always a far better, more effective report than that reading a monologue. Good oral reports do pay attention to time. Remember, I said we have limited time with our bosses at different points. We want to make sure that we're mindful of the time and we leave plenty of time for questions and to have that dialogue. We don't want to get stuck in an awkward position. We don't want to get caught with our pants down. We don't want to be stuck going back, doing the research, and trying to read our resources when we have to know the answers like the back of our hand. Right? So this little icon is to illustrate the frustration of not knowing a case well enough to answer questions. You're the expert on your case, and you should know it backwards, forwards, and upside down. Don't become combative. You may get some hard questions from the boss, and the boss may push you in directions that you weren't expecting to go and didn't want to go in. But you can't be Mr. Angry. You can't be Mr. Indignant. You have to be gracious and accept those questions and not become combative. You should pay attention to the body language of your audience, the body language of your boss. By keeping that eye contact that I mentioned earlier, you're going to notice whether your audience is lost, confused, distracted, all things that help you reorient your report and again, keep it as a dialogue that's informative rather than a monologue that does nothing. It is a good idea to bring an agenda or a checklist or an outline to guide your presentation, and if it would be helpful to your audience, to bring them an agenda or an outline as well. That's completely valid and can be very helpful. It could create new talking points, but it isn't required. Only use an agenda or an outline if you really think it's going to be helpful. Don't bring in all of the research and an entire file with you to the report. You're not going to be able to use it. You're not going to be able to dive into those papers. And remember what I said earlier. You need to know these cases that you're going to talk about and your client facts like the back of your hand. You're the new expert on this case and you have to act as such. So bringing a whole big stack of papers is not going to inspire confidence and it's not going to encourage that dialogue. It's going to encourage you to go back into reading instead of becoming the expert that you are. So that's all we have on Project Planning 101. I hope that this was helpful and informative and will get you on the way to executing a great open memo. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or stop by in office hours. Happy drafting.